Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales that inspire, challenge, and touch the heart. Today's story is one of transformation, resilience, and the unexpected bonds that can change our lives forever. Meet Ryan, a man driven by ambition and pressure, and Lily, a young woman fighting to rise above her struggles. Their worlds collide in a twist of fate, leading to a journey filled with lessons about love, empathy, and the power of second chances. Don't miss this extraordinary tale. Subscribe to Life Stories now and join us as we begin today's heartfelt journey. It was a cold winter afternoon in New York City, and Ryan stormed out of his office, his emotions in turmoil. The bustling streets seemed to echo the frustration in his heart. Brooke, his girlfriend, had said something that cut deep, and he couldn't shake the anger. Her words replayed in his mind like an unwanted melody, growing louder with each step. Why did she always have to be so dismissive of his feelings? Why couldn't she understand him? Ryan walked aimlessly, his thoughts swirling like the snowflakes that danced through the air. The city seemed indifferent to his turmoil, its people rushing by, consumed with their own lives. He hoped the walk would clear his mind, but it only fueled his agitation. He needed a break from the noise in his head. Feeling the gnawing ache of hunger, Ryan spotted a small, modest diner tucked into the corner of a quiet street. The warm glow of its lights and the promise of a meal felt inviting. A temporary refuge from the storm inside him. He stepped inside, finding comfort in the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation. Ryan slid into a booth and ordered a meal, hoping that food might settle his restless mind. When the plate arrived, though, he found his appetite was gone. He pushed the food around absent-mindedly, his thoughts drifting back to Brooke and the argument that had soured his mood. He couldn't understand why their relationship always seemed to teeter on the edge of conflict. They had everything going for them, on paper at least, but something vital was missing. Brooke's constant demands, her lack of empathy, left him feeling empty, frustrated. Ryan abandoned his meal and left the diner. He didn't even realize he'd left his wallet on the table. His thoughts were elsewhere, lost in the whirlwind of emotions. A short while later, Lily entered the diner. She was a young woman in her mid-20s. Her thin frame wrapped in layers of mismatched clothing. Her face bore the weariness of someone who had faced more challenges than triumphs in life. Hunger gnawed at her stomach as she stepped inside, drawn by the warmth and the aroma of food. She hadn't eaten in days, and the sight of leftover food on Ryan's table was too much to resist. Lily hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the room. The diner was busy, and no one seemed to notice her. Driven by desperation, she slipped into Ryan's booth and began eating the remnants of his meal. Each bite felt like a lifeline, though guilt weighed on her. She knew it wasn't hers to take, but hunger had stripped her of pride. As Lily ate, Ryan re-entered the diner, realizing his wallet was missing. His eyes immediately landed on Lily, sitting at his table, eating his food. His frustration erupted into anger. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Are you stealing my food?" Startled, Lily froze, the fork trembling in her hand. She looked up at Ryan, her wide eyes filled with fear and shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I wasn't trying to steal. I was just so hungry." But Ryan, still consumed by his own emotions, couldn't see past the act. "That's no excuse," he snapped. "You can't just take what doesn't belong to you." Lily's voice trembled as she tried to explain. "I haven't eaten in days. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." Ryan's anger blinded him to her desperation. He dismissed her with cold words, telling her to leave. Humiliated and defeated, Lily stood and left the diner, tears stinging her eyes as she stepped back into the cold. Ryan sat back down, retrieving his wallet from the table. As he stared at the plate of food Lily had left unfinished, a pang of guilt crept into his chest. The image of her face, the fear and desperation in her eyes, lingered in his mind. He tried to push the feeling away, rationalizing his reaction. But the guilt refused to leave. That night, as Ryan returned to his apartment, the weight of the day's events bore down on him. Brooke's harsh words still echoed in his mind. But so did Lily's trembling voice. He couldn't understand why he felt so unsettled. What did it matter if she had eaten his food? She was just some stranger. Wasn't she? Yet, deep down, Ryan knew there was more to it. Lily's eyes, filled with vulnerability, had struck something in him, a reminder of the humanity they both shared. For all his success and privilege, he couldn't ignore the stark contrast between his world and hers. He thought about her hunger, her desperation, and the way he had dismissed her. It wasn't just her actions that unsettled him, it was his own. Ryan sat in silence, staring out at the city lights, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. It was the beginning of a journey he didn't yet understand. A path that would challenge his perceptions and change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The next day dawned cold and overcast. Much like Ryan's mood, he sat at his desk in the office, attempting to focus on work but failing miserably. The events of the previous day still clung to him, the argument with Brooke, the encounter with Lily, and the guilt that seemed to settle deeper the more he thought about it. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Brooke. With a sigh, he answered, already bracing himself for her sharp tone. About the gala tomorrow night, she began without greeting, her voice as cold as the weather outside. If you want me to go, you'll need to transfer $5,000 to my account. Ryan was stunned. What? Why do you need that kind of money for one event? He asked, his frustration simmering. Brooke's response was dismissive. It doesn't matter. If you want me there, that's the price. Otherwise, you can figure it out yourself. With that, she hung up, leaving Ryan staring at his phone in disbelief. The gala was one of the most important events of the year for his father's company. It wasn't just a social occasion, it was a display of status and connections. Arriving alone wasn't an option, it would be seen as unprofessional and potentially embarrassing. But the idea of paying Brooke to attend felt wrong. Their relationship had always been transactional in subtle ways. But this demand crossed a line. As Ryan mulled over his predicament, an image of Lily flickered in his mind. Despite the dirt and weariness that marked her appearance, there had been something striking about her eyes, her quiet dignity despite her desperation. An idea began to take shape. One that seemed absurd at first but grew more logical the longer he thought about it. What if Lily came to the gala with a proper dress, some grooming, and a bit of guidance? She could pass as his date. It was unconventional, yes, but it solved his immediate problem. And it wasn't just about appearances, he felt a strange compulsion to make amends for how he'd treated her. Determined, Ryan left the office early and set out to find her. The streets were crowded with the usual mix of hurried professionals, tourists, and those less fortunate, huddled in doorways or holding signs. It took hours of searching. But eventually, he spotted her sitting on a cold sidewalk, her thin frame leaning against a brick wall. She looked tired, her eyes downcast as she clutched a battered cup, hoping for spare change. Ryan approached her cautiously, unsure how she would react to seeing him again. When Lily looked up and recognized him, her expression shifted, first surprise, then wariness. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat, though her eyes betrayed a hint of resentment. Ryan hesitated, realizing how strange his proposition might sound. "I want to apologize for yesterday," he began. "I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. You were hungry. And I was too wrapped up in my own problems to see it." Lily stared at him, skeptical. "Why are you here? You didn't come all this way just to say sorry." He nodded, acknowledging her point. "I need your help," he admitted. "There's an event tomorrow night, and I need someone to go with me. You'd be doing me a huge favor, and I'd make sure it's worth your time." Her eyebrows shot up in disbelief. You want me to go to some fancy party with you? Do I look like someone who belongs in a place like that? You will, Ryan assured her. I'll take care of everything, clothes, hair, whatever you need. And I'll pay you for your time. Enough to make a difference for you. Lily hesitated. The offer both tempting and bewildering. She had spent so long surviving day-to-day that the idea of attending a gala felt surreal. But the mention of money was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a chance to eat or stay warm for a night, it could be a step toward something more stable. Even if only temporarily. Why me? She asked. Her tone softer now. Ryan shrugged. His expression sincere. You're beautiful. And I think you deserve a chance to feel that way again. Maybe this can be a fresh start for both of us. Lily studied him for a long moment, weighing his words and his intentions. Finally, she nodded, though her voice was cautious. Okay. But this isn't charity. And I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. Ryan smiled. Relieved. Deal. As he walked away, arrangements already forming in his mind, he felt a strange sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fixing a social dilemma anymore. It was about something bigger, something he couldn't quite define yet. Lily, too, sat in silence after he left, the faintest spark of hope flickering within her. Neither of them realized that their agreement would mark the beginning of a journey far beyond what either had imagined. The following day was a whirlwind of activity. Ryan had arranged everything: a personal shopper to find a dress, a hairstylist, and even a makeup artist. Lily, who had spent years blending into the shadows of the city, suddenly found herself at the center of attention. It was overwhelming. The boutique was filled with racks of elegant gowns, fabrics that felt like a distant dream to her fingertips. At first, she was hesitant to even step out of the dressing room. The image in the mirror didn't feel like her. Each dress seemed more extravagant than the last. But Ryan encouraged her to keep trying, his patience never wavering. Finally, she emerged in a navy blue gown that hugged her figure and flowed like water. The stylist pinned up her hair in a sleek twist. And for the first time in years, Lily saw her reflection and smiled. Ryan arrived at the boutique just as the finishing touches were being applied. When he saw her, he froze, his breath catching in his throat. She was stunning. The transformation was beyond anything he had anticipated. Lily noticed his silence and arched a brow, her lips curving into a faint smirk. Is this going to work for your fancy party? Or should I try something else? She asked, half teasing, half nervous. Ryan blinked and shook his head. No, you're perfect, he said, his voice unusually soft. Lily wasn't used to compliments, and his words made her shift uncomfortably. Let's just get this over with, she replied, her voice steady but her fingers gripping the clutch tightly. The drive to the gala was quiet. Ryan occasionally glanced at her, sensing the tension. You don't have to be nervous, he said. Just be yourself. She let out a dry laugh. Ryan, myself is someone who doesn't belong at this kind of event. Let's not pretend otherwise. He didn't argue. She had a point. But there was something about Lily that made him believe she could handle it. More than that, he wanted her to realize it too. The gala was held in a grand ballroom, its high ceilings adorned with glittering chandeliers. The crowd was a mix of New York's elite business magnates, politicians, and socialites. Ryan felt the familiar pressure of expectation as they stepped inside. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Lily, with her head held high, looked every bit the part. As they walked through the room, heads turned, whispers followed, and curious gazes lingered. Ryan introduced her simply as Lily, offering no explanation of who she was or how they had met. It was enough to intrigue people but not enough to invite questions. Lily, for her part, surprised even herself. The initial discomfort faded as she found herself engaging in polite conversations, her wit and candor disarming those who underestimated her. One older woman, dripping in diamonds, leaned toward Ryan and whispered, "Your date is delightful. Where have you been hiding her?" Ryan smiled, glancing at Lily. "She's one of a kind," he replied, the words carrying a weight he hadn't expected. Throughout the evening, Lily's confidence grew. She realized she could hold her own in this world of wealth and pretense. Beneath the surface, these people weren't so different. They masked their insecurities with designer clothes and practiced smiles. But their fears and desires were just as human as hers. Ryan watched her in awe. The woman who had sat on a cold sidewalk yesterday now commanded a room. He felt an unfamiliar sense of pride. Not just in how well she had blended in, but in who she was unapologetically herself. As the night wore on, Ryan found himself stealing glances at her, noticing details he hadn't before, the way her laughter softened her features, the strength in her eyes. It unsettled him. This was supposed to be a transactional arrangement. Nothing more. But seeing her like this, he realized she was more than just part of a plan. She was extraordinary. When the gala finally ended, Ryan and Lily stepped out into the crisp night air. The city glittered around them, its energy quieter but no less alive. Lily pulled the shawl around her shoulders and looked up at him. "Well, that was something," she said. Ryan chuckled. "You were incredible. I mean it." "Thank you." She shrugged, her voice light but her gaze serious. "You paid me for a job. I just did it. Don't make it more than it is." He nodded, though her words stung more than he wanted to admit. They climbed into the car, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. For Lily, the night had been a strange mix of empowerment and discomfort. For Ryan, it was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. As he dropped her off at the hotel he had arranged, she paused before stepping out. "Thanks for the opportunity," she said. "No, Lily. Thank you," he replied, watching as she disappeared through the doors. That night, Ryan lay awake, replaying the evening in his mind. He realized Lily had stirred something in him, a yearning for authenticity, for connection. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but he knew one thing: this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. The morning after the gala, Ryan sat in his office, staring at the city skyline. He couldn't focus on work, his thoughts kept drifting back to the previous night. Lily had exceeded all expectations, handling herself with grace and poise. She'd been more than just a date, she'd been a revelation. But the high of the gala quickly gave way to the reality of his situation. His father, George, had called earlier, reminding him of the family meeting that evening. Ryan knew what it meant. George would once again press him to settle down, to find a partner who could represent the family's legacy. Without that, Ryan wouldn't inherit the company, a business he'd worked tirelessly to prepare for. The pressure was suffocating. Ryan had no interest in marrying for convenience or appearances, but his father's expectations loomed large. The gala had been a temporary reprieve, but it wasn't enough. He needed something or someone more permanent, at least for the time being. As he pondered his next move, an idea began to form. It was risky, but it could work. Lily had proven she could adapt to his world, even thrive in it. What if she played the role of his fiancée? The thought was absurd, yet it made sense. With her help, he could convince his father he was serious about settling down, buy himself time, and ensure the company stayed within his grasp. And he could compensate Lily handsomely for her trouble. Determined, Ryan set out to find her again. He returned to the modest hotel where she had stayed the night after the gala. When he knocked on her door, she opened it cautiously, still wearing the hotel's provided robe. Her expression shifted from curiosity to guardedness as she saw him standing there. "Ryan," she said, crossing her arms. "What brings you here? I thought our deal was done." "It is," he replied, his tone earnest. "But I need to ask you for another favor. This one's bigger." Lily raised an eyebrow, her skepticism clear. "Bigger? You want me to do another party?" Ryan shook his head. Not exactly. I need you to pretend to be my fiancé. Just for a little while. The words hung in the air. Lily stared at him. Incredulous. Your fiancé? Are you serious? Yes. Ryan said. Stepping inside and closing the door behind him. I know it sounds crazy. But hear me out. My father won't hand over the company unless I prove I'm ready to settle down. You saw how well last night went. You fit in perfectly. If you agree to this, I'll make sure it's worth your time. Lily laughed, though there was no humor in it. Worth my time? Ryan. I'm a homeless woman. You think I can just walk into your world and pretend to be engaged? Your family will see through it in a heartbeat. They won't. Ryan insisted. You're smart. Adaptable. And you proved last night that you belong in that world. I'll help you with everything, clothes, a place to stay, even a backstory. You won't be doing this for free. I'll pay you enough to change your life. Lily's expression softened slightly, though her doubt remained. Why me? You could hire a professional to do this. Someone who knows what they're doing. Ryan hesitated, searching for the right words. Because you're real. You're not pretending to be someone you're not. That's what makes you convincing. And honestly, I owe you. For the way I treated you before. For a long moment. Lily said nothing. The offer was tempting. And she couldn't deny the money would be life-changing. But the thought of stepping further into Ryan's world, of pretending to be something she wasn't, felt overwhelming. Finally, she spoke. All right. I'll do it. But let's be clear, this is business. Nothing more. Agreed. Ryan said. Relief washing over him. Thank you. Over the next few days, Ryan arranged everything. He rented a comfortable apartment for Lily, complete with new clothes and all the essentials. He spent hours coaching her on their story, how they met, how long they'd been together, the details of their relationship. Lily absorbed it all with a determination that surprised him. For Lily, it wasn't just about the money. It was a chance to redefine herself, to escape the shadow of her past. Yet as she stepped into her new role, she couldn't ignore the growing connection between her and Ryan. He was kind, attentive, and surprisingly vulnerable beneath his polished exterior. For Ryan, the arrangement became more complicated by the day. The more time he spent with Lily, the more he admired her strength and resilience. But he reminded himself that this was a temporary partnership. Nothing more. Any feelings that surfaced had to stay buried. As the day of the family meeting approached, both Ryan and Lily knew the stakes were high. For Ryan, it was about securing his future. For Lily, it was about proving she could rise above her circumstances. Neither could predict just how deeply their lives would intertwine or how their arrangement would change them both forever. The family estate stood like a monument to wealth and tradition, its grand facade a stark contrast to the world Lily had known. As Ryan's car approached the sweeping driveway, Lily's nerves crept in. She adjusted her dress, a tailored piece Ryan had chosen, and smoothed her hair, though she had rehearsed every detail of their fabricated story. The reality of meeting his family was daunting. Ryan glanced at her, sensing her tension. You'll be fine, he said, his voice steady. Just stick to the plan. My dad will love you. And my mom, well, let's hope for the best. Lily raised an eyebrow. Not exactly reassuring. Ryan. He chuckled, though there was a hint of unease in his laugh. Trust me. You'll do great. As they entered the estate, Lily was struck by the opulence of the place, the marble floors, the glittering chandeliers, the walls adorned with generations of family portraits. It felt surreal to stand in a house like this, let alone as someone pretending to belong. George, Ryan's father, greeted them in the grand living room. He was a tall man with an air of authority, but his warm smile put Lily at ease. So this is Lily, he said, extending a hand. Ryan has told me so much about you. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Bennett. Lily replied, her voice calm despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Call me George," he said with a nod, then gestured for them to sit. "Let's get to know each other." As the conversation flowed, Lily found herself relaxing. George was genuinely interested in her, asking questions about her upbringing and interests. She stuck closely to the backstory Ryan had crafted: a modest upbringing, a passion for art, and a chance meeting with Ryan at a gallery event. George seemed charmed by her humility and intelligence, his laughter ringing through the room at her quick-witted responses. Margaret, Ryan's mother, was another story. She observed Lily with a critical eye, her demeanor cool and distant. Every now and then, she would ask pointed questions, her tone sharp. "Where exactly did you grow up, Lily?" she asked, her words laced with skepticism. "In a small town outside of Denver," Lily answered smoothly, her rehearsed confidence hiding the pang of unease. "I see," Margaret replied, her expression unreadable. She sipped her tea, her gaze lingering on Lily a moment longer than necessary. After dinner, George pulled Ryan aside while Lily remained with Margaret. "She's wonderful," George said, clapping his son on the shoulder. "Intelligent, poised, a perfect match for you." Ryan nodded, relieved. "I knew you'd like her." "But Margaret," George hesitated. "She's not convinced." "Give her time, Ryan. She'll come around." Meanwhile, Lily sat with Margaret, feeling the weight of her scrutiny. Margaret leaned forward, her voice low. "I've seen women like you before," she said. "You're charming. But I can't shake the feeling you're hiding something." Lily met her gaze evenly. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Bennet. But I assure you, I'm here because I care about Ryan. Nothing more, nothing less." Margaret raised an eyebrow, her lips pressing into a thin line. "We'll see," she said, standing abruptly and excusing herself from the room. When Ryan returned, he found Lily alone, her expression unreadable. "How'd it go with my mom?" he asked cautiously. Lily gave a small shrug. "She's not my biggest fan. But I think she'll warm up eventually." Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's always been protective. Don't take it personally." "I'm not," Lily said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just hard, pretending to fit into a world that feels so far from mine." Ryan sat beside her, his voice soft. "You're doing better than you think. My dad's already smitten with you. And that's half the battle." Lily smiled faintly, but the weight of the situation lingered. She had agreed to this arrangement for the money, to escape the life she'd been living. But as the stakes grew higher, she realized it wasn't just about playing a part anymore. It was about proving to herself and perhaps to Ryan that she was more than the sum of her circumstances. As they left the estate later that evening, Ryan couldn't help but glance at her, admiration flickering in his eyes. Despite the pressure, she had handled herself with grace. But he also knew the hardest part was yet to come. Margaret's suspicion wouldn't fade easily, and their carefully constructed story was one slip away from unraveling. For now, though, they had made it through the first test. And as the car rolled back toward the city, Ryan felt a growing sense of respect and something more for the woman sitting beside him. The days following their visit to the Bennet estate were a whirlwind of activity. George had been completely charmed by Lily, even calling Ryan the next morning to commend him on finding such a perfect match. Ryan felt relieved but knew his father's approval wasn't the biggest hurdle. Margaret's lingering suspicion was a shadow over their carefully constructed charade. Ryan tried to reassure Lily as they prepared for their next encounter with his family. They had been invited to spend a weekend at the estate, a chance for Margaret to observe Lily more closely. "She's testing us," Ryan explained. "She wants to see if you'll slip up." Lily nodded, her face calm but her hands tightening around the teacup she held. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice steady. "I've handled worse." Ryan admired her resilience, though he worried about the toll this was taking on her. Despite her composed demeanor, He could see the cracks, the moments when she withdrew into herself. The flicker of doubt in her eyes. He wished he could tell her she didn't have to do this. But he couldn't afford to lose her help now. When they arrived at the estate, Margaret greeted them with her usual frosty demeanor. George, on the other hand, was delighted to see Lily, enveloping her in a warm hug. "You're becoming part of the family already," he said with a laugh, making Margaret's lips tighten. The weekend unfolded in a series of carefully orchestrated interactions. Lily played her part flawlessly, her wit and charm endearing her to everyone but Margaret. She laughed at George's jokes, complimented the chef on the meals, and even engaged in a lively debate with one of the Bennett family friends about art, a topic she had crammed for with Ryan's help. But Margaret's watchful gaze never wavered. She studied Lily like a hawk, searching for inconsistencies in her story. At one point, she cornered Ryan in the study, her tone sharp. "Do you really expect me to believe this relationship is real?" she demanded. "Where did you even meet this girl? Some gallery in Denver? It doesn't add up." Ryan bristled but forced himself to remain calm. "Lily is exactly who I said she is. I know you're protective, Mom, but you have to trust me on this." Margaret shook her head, her expression softening slightly but still skeptical. "I just want what's best for you, Ryan. And I'm not convinced she is." Meanwhile, Lily found herself alone with Margaret more than once. Each time, Margaret's questions grew more pointed. "What are your long-term goals, Lily?" she asked during tea. "What kind of future do you envision with Ryan?" Lily answered as best she could, sticking to the story. But Margaret's piercing gaze made her feel exposed. "I want to support Ryan in everything he does," Lily said, hoping it sounded sincere. Margaret's lips curved into a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I see." Later that evening, when Lily and Ryan had a rare moment alone, she exhaled deeply. "Your mom's not buying this," she said quietly. "She knows something's off." Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's stubborn. But my dad is on our side. That's what matters most." Lily nodded, though unease flickered across her face. "I just don't want to make things harder for you." "You're not," Ryan said firmly, meeting her gaze. "You've been incredible through all of this." His words brought a faint smile to her lips, but they didn't erase the growing weight on her shoulders. She had entered this arrangement for practical reasons, but it was becoming more emotionally complex than she'd anticipated. The lines between the roles they played and their real selves were beginning to blur. By the end of the weekend, George was more enchanted with Lily than ever. But Margaret remained distant. As they left the estate, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that his mother was plotting something. He glanced at Lily, who sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window. "Thank you for everything," he said softly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Lily turned to him, her expression unreadable. "We're not done yet, Ryan. This isn't over." She was right. Their charade was holding together. But the cracks were beginning to show. And with Margaret's distrust growing and the emotional stakes rising, it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. In the end, Ryan and Lily's journey took an unexpected turn from a charade to something real. What began as a desperate plan for survival and social approval blossomed into a genuine connection. Ryan's father, George, embraced Lily wholeheartedly, while Margaret, after much resistance, came to see the depth of her character and the love she and Ryan shared. Their marriage wasn't just a celebration of their bond but a testament to resilience, transformation, and the power of seeing beyond appearances. Together, they built a life that blended their strengths and dreams, proving that even the unlikeliest connections can lead to something extraordinary. This story reminds us that love and understanding can transcend the barriers of class, past mistakes, and prejudice. If you enjoyed this heartfelt tale, make sure to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring narratives that touch the soul. Stay tuned for our next story.